Conflict creates uncertainty, and uncertainty makes us feel unsafe. That's why, in the middle of tension, our brains instinctively search for logic and control. We want to understand what's happening, to make sense of it, and to feel like we're back on solid ground. But here's the paradox: those control seeking instincts can actually backfire. Traditional conflict resolution often starts with analyzing what went wrong, the dysfunction, the root cause, the styles in play. And while that builds self awareness and helps us explain the why behind the conflict, it can also keep us stuck because it focuses on the problem, traps us in blame, or overwhelms us by overthinking. And insight alone doesn't change behavior. In this episode, we'll unpack how shifting from problem analysis to potential and progress can help you manage conflict in ways that protect your health, your energy, and your peace of mind. So, Dr. Teplow, why doesn't figuring out what our conflict style is to help us, how come that doesn't help us work to solve conflict resolution?
Oh, I love that. It's similar to that question is similar to what we come up in other areas, which is people want to figure out the why. Why did this happen? What's triggering it? How did I get into this in the first place? As if having insights will change behavior. But it doesn't. The only thing that changes behavior is making a change. And we don't know so often why we develop certain behavioral patterns. No, we know in general why. Behaviors that we engage in are often from the past, are often what we learn to adapt to situations. So if you always got yelled at, if you brought up something that did please you or conflict, if you always got yelled at, then you learn to avoid conflict. That was very adaptive. It had a purpose to protect you when you were a kid and, somebody yelled at you, your parent or your teacher, whatever. But now it's maladaptive. So figuring out why it happened or how it happened doesn't help you in the present time when the context, the people, everything may be different.
So when I have like the conflict style of avoidance, or I don't know what some of the other ones are, attachment, or whatever the conflict style is. So I figured that out. Okay. What does that mean? What do I do with that? And what I've seen in the past with other programs is that you learn this and you're supposed to learn what the other people are and identify what those are. And somehow you have some strategies that allow those to connect in some way. This all has to happen rapidly on the fly and is nearly impossible.
Yeah. That's the other thing is that during conflict, if it's very intense, emotions are high, your brain's just off. You're not thinking about, am I, avoidant? Am I harmonizing? Am I compromising? Blah, blah, blah. So the very first thing is you have to get grounded. You have to get back in the present. And, that's often using your body in some way, primarily take a breath. Or if things are really hard, say, it's really important for me to work with you to get over this conflict, to somehow figure out how we can resolve it together. Right now, I can't manage it. I need to take a 10-minute break.
Yeah, I need a
So,
moment. I need a
yeah,
moment here.
right. So you're either breathing or you're time out and you're getting your thinking brain back online. But
I think that's something important because you are your thinking brain is offline in this moment. Physiologically, your thinking brain is your brain is constricted in that fight or flight mode, and you're not able to come up with solutions because you've literally constricted your brain cells, and they aren't able to flow between ideas as well as you need them to be in such an intense situation.
Absolutely. And one of the, I think, absolute primary ways to resolve conflict is to be curious. You can't resolve conflict if you go in with all guns blazing, or it has to be that way because there's always another person. It takes two people to tango. And so once your brain comes back online, then you have to think how, then you have the opportunity to think. And it's also to be curious.
And so instead of saying, well, can I be curious about why didn't this work? What went wrong? I mean, that's some curiosity, but
Yeah,
that also keeps you down that root cause of why is it happening?
Right. And it doesn't, and you can go on and on and on with what's wrong. But I think we talked about the taxi driver or getting a taxi driver scenario.
Metaphor.
You hop in the taxi driver says, where to, bud, or where to, ma'am? You say, well, not there. And I already went to the zoo last week. So not to the zoo and not here. Where are you going to go? Or you can say, well, I tried to get there last week, but there was a flood and here was the problem. It's just not going to get
Oh
me there.
yeah, I've never thought about it that way. You're telling the cab driver all the causes of why you don't want to go to certain places because we analyzed that that didn't work or this was the problem. It still doesn't say where you want to go.
Exactly. And that's the same in conflict. And what happens often in conflict is we get stuck because we're arguing about strategies to get there. And we used that story about the window in the library where one person wanted fresh air and the other person didn't want their papers flying anywhere. They wanted their papers on the desk, and the window if it was open, the breeze came in. It was so lovely, but the paper went all over. If they closed it, it was stuffy. The paper stood on the table, blah, blah, blah. They went fighting. Librarian comes in and says, kind of what's the problem? Opens the window at the top or the other end of the, library. They get the fresh air and they don't get the breeze directly on the paper. So that's the difference between the position I take, this window must be open or it must be this way, versus the interest. What do we want together? What's our shared dream in essence?
And then in that case, that example of the library problem with the window is that now if I'm looking at this from that question of who's to blame here, you're wanting the window open, me wanting the window closed, you wanting to have it nice and tidy. Now it's about you versus me in this argument.
Exactly. And so many arguments. You can see it, especially in couples who are bickering. I love it. It's always about who's right, because somehow that triggers our sense of self, who we are, and we have to be right. And that we can't solve conflict that way because we each have a perspective.
And in that question, if we do mixed metaphors here, who's right is still not telling the cab driver where we want to go.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. So sometimes it doesn't matter who's right. It really
Doesn't.
doesn't. It matters, how are we going to get along? And when you ask people, ask families, and this is actually the evolution of solution focused practice, is that 40 years ago in Milwaukee, big group practice, they realize they recognize families come in with every different variation of problems. Every family is unique. At the end of the day, what do they want? They want the exact same thing. They all just want to get along. And I think, we just want to get along. We want to be comfortable. We want to, have peace. Each of our get alongs is unique to us, but we just want to get along. And so conflict resolution is, how do we get along? How do we each get what we want? What is our shared goal?
Yeah, and lots of times we spend a lot of time just trying to figure out why the problem was. Let's do an analysis of what's not working, why it's not working, because again, that somehow some insight's going to come from that, and there is some insight that comes from understanding the why, and that also sometimes makes us feel better too as well. But then
Absolutely.
it still doesn't solve the problem.
No, and we can feel well. And it's interesting. We work with so many people, and it's it's a normal human desire to figure out, how is this working? Because we want to make sense out of the world. We want things to make sense. And we also have, in some ways, a false sense of security when we think, oh, we know why it happened. But again, it doesn't tell us, how are we going to make it different? And I think that's the crucial question, is what do we want to be different when things are going well, when things are, in our better future and our better place? What are we doing together that's working for both of us?
So this is a shift in perspective, and we know that when you get to this shift in perspective and you do it effectively, that you have a 20% greater clarity in your decision making, in your memory, and in your focus during these situations. And so that's a pretty profound amount of improvement. So how do we make this shift? What's the start of this shift? And you teased it earlier about the curiosity.
Yeah. Well, so interestingly, and why that idea of, what style am I? And if I'm this style, then I use these strategies, is that it puts all the burden of getting to where we want to go on that problem solving part of our brain that's analytical, it's judging, it's evaluating, it's assessing, it's figuring. And often it's also saying, no, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. When we do, well, how do we engage? So when we're curious, we're not judging. We're not evaluating. Look at any kid playing in the mud or, digging up worms. They don't know that it's icky, gross, or whatever. They're just exploring. When we allow ourselves to say, so in that better future, let's say we solved our conflict even a little bit, what would be different? What would be you doing? What would be you noticing? We're using that curiosity. It immediately activates that part of our brain that's creative, that's and innovative. And you never know what solutions you will come up with. If you restrict yourself to, I'm a, this kind of avoidant whatever, and here is the solution, then you're not really unleashing the very precious human capacity for imagination.
Because you are more than that label. You are more than that box that you've been evaluated into. Yes, you have some traits or some behaviors that could align with that, but you are much more than that. And I think that's really what we're saying here, is that this label, this box you're putting yourself in, this why, this description of what this thing is, isn't helping you solve the problem, and in fact could also be holding you back from even bigger, more innovative, more creative solutions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It can hold you back. And just imagine when one person is, defines themselves, or because they've done that assessment of kind of authoritarian, take charge, kind of, how do I deal with conflict? I take charge and tell people what to do, versus the person who gives in. And you have two of them with their ways of going about things, their tendencies, then even with the scripts about how to work it, you're really limited, versus
And
saying,
also, you're not only just limited, it's just that you're not always that in all situations. So in
oh,
certain situations, you could be that take charge type of person, but in other situations, you could be the person as the pleaser, or whatever. Like, don't even know all the descriptions of the people, but that that's the key here, is that in not all situations, we're so complex as humans.
yeah, that's a really, really good point. Thank you. Thank you for making it. Exactly. We're not 100% all the way, all the time, etc. Yeah, we're complex. Human beings are complex. And so you can go round and round figuring out why, how, blah, blah, blah. Um, and still and not get anywhere. Where you get when you the way to get somewhere is to know where you want to go. There's so many quotes about, if you don't, I forgot what, if you don't know where you're going to, or if you don't know where you want to go, that's where you're going to get. I'm sure I screwed that one up, but that's the idea. You have to know where you want to get. You have to know and what the meaning of getting there is, because if we're talking about conflict, it takes two to tango. So you can, as we've said, win the battle but lose the war. So if it's with somebody with whom you're close, you want to maintain the relationship. You have to manage the conflict, so you get what you want, the other person gets what they want, you get what you want together, and you build the relationship.
So be curious. What are some concrete things that you can do to help with conflict resolution?
Have a really good sense of the kind of person you want to be in that conflict. Visualize yourself, rehearse, and being curious is very hard when you're triggered. So number one, you have to practice having those, kind of adrenaline rushes, and learn how to tell yourself, drop your shoulders, take a breath, learn how to see yourself as if you're a character in a movie, so that you aren't so enmeshed in the feeling at the moment, that you notice, oh, I feel the heat, or I feel my hands do a tingling or whatever. Oh, I notice I'm getting angry. Take that pause. What do you want? What is your shared goal? And I think just to be very open with the person. We're on the same side of the table. This is a difficult conversation, and we both want to come out of it. How do we want to come out of it together? And start talking about that.
Yeah, so this shifts the focus away from what's wrong or who's to blame, to what do we both want out of this. And I think that's, when we talk about shifts here, this is one of the, be curious, but get on the same page of what the outcome that we want here, so that way we can solve this together.
Right. And the meaning of that outcome. So instead of, and I brought this up before, instead of we have to go to the beach or we have to go to the mountains on the next vacation, it's what difference will it make when, you've gotten to go my case shooting in the mountains or my husband go sit on the beach. He'll be relaxed. I'll be energized. When we know that that is the meaning of these strategies we're struggling with, well, what way? So suppose, do a lot of supposing. Imagine we went on a vacation together. At the end of that vacation, you felt relaxed and I felt energized. What would we have done that would have that would have left us with that. And then we start coming up with really interesting things. We think, you know what? I actually ever always wanted to see that country, that has good beaches, no hiking, but I realized they have a great climbing wall. I could go climbing on the climbing wall. Or my husband say, you want to go to these mountains. And I realized, yeah, there's Ocean Beach, but I realized, oh yeah, Lake Como is not bad in Italy for sitting on the side of some beautiful water.
Yeah, and so we look at the outcomes. What other shifts can we do to help us get through the conflicts?
I think ask ourselves what's worked. Um, how have we managed in the past? Not necessarily that we are going to lock ourselves in, well, it worked that way, so let's do it again. But what helped us? What enabled? Who were we in that conflict? Well, I realized I felt a lot more patient, or I realized, we sat on the couch together next to each other instead of at opposite sides of the table. You never know, what was it? And you talked about context. Was it the environment? Was I too hot? Was I thirsty? We just don't know. So being able to do more imagination of and looking back, when has it worked before when we've been able to work out conflict?
So that's different than looking back and saying why wasn't it working?
Oh,
What was the
entirely.
what was the problem here? What doing that root cause analysis? We're looking back on what worked in the past, or how do we do it even a little bit better? Not even we didn't have to be perfect. How do we do it even a little bit better?
Yes, and that's really important. We're not looking for perfect. We're not looking where you're good or strong. And as I've probably said 100 times this week, you can be a lousy cook, but still feed your family nutritious food. So you don't have to be good at conflict. You have to you have to know where you're going. You have to, and I think, who is it? Who's the person you want to be? How do you want to see yourself? You want to see yourself as an angry person, or do you want to see yourself as a kind person? Or in a loving situation, do you want to be loving? You can be loving and still assert your opinion. There are a few little tricks too. We could talk about that.
Yeah, and so you're going into the future and imagining what this differences will make for you, what this will look like. When have we done this in the past, so that can help inform what that future is. And that's different than just saying what can we do next? That even the smallest thing, we still want to do that, but and sometimes we get stuck on that because we can't agree what the next step is, and that's when we go back to the root cause analysis to figure that out, or how can we define this? But it's different when you go in the future first. You've talked about
When
this
you go in the
before. I want you to say that again because it's such a great thing to be able to understand.
Yeah, when you go in the future first, and we know from brain imaging, it's amazing. You see what the brain does. If you think, oh, what's a strategy? Your brain's going to problem solving, assessing, analyzing, figuring out why it won't work. When you go like, oh, what would I be doing? What's my dream? Imagine in a world where anything, where I was free to choose exactly where I wanted to go, how it would work. Your brain is that creativity is unleashed, and you can never anticipate what kind of ideas you'll come up with when you're not thinking about what do I have to do, but you're putting yourself into the future, into a better future. What would you be doing? You start realizing what would be different, how things would be different. That's very powerful. And how would it be different with that person in the context of that person? What would you be doing together? You might realize, oh, what's really been fun is we had that silly joke book, and I remember we read it every night, and it was so much fun. Now I don't care where we go on vacation. Let's make sure to take the joke book and have an evening where we tell each other, we read those jokes because that was so much fun.
So you said there's several taxes you can do, and we want to get into this, but you know what? We don't have time for that today, unfortunately. So, but we do have our upcoming conflict resolution quest. This is going to be a 7-day quest where you can free yourself from the stress and regret while protecting your health and relationships, because there is so much about how affects your long-term health risks with this chronic stress that you have from being in this stress loop. And we'll be getting into that during the conflict resolution quest. So we'll have the link to learn more about that quest in the show notes. Any final words on conflict resolution, Dr. Teplow?
Yeah. Take a big breath and be curious.
Be
And
curious.
know that there's always hope. As long as you have
That's
a
all.
destination, as long as you have hope.
That sounds like a perfect place for us to wrap up. If you found that this was helpful, hit the like and subscribe. It helps with the algorithm, as you know. And we talk about solution-focused strategies every week to improve your health and well-being. And like I said, we have a conflict resolution quest coming up. We'll have that link for you in the show notes. We also have a perceived stress assessment that we'll put into the show notes to show you where you are and give you a personalized score to help you understand how to move away from jelly pressures. And that is part of a larger program we have here at Stamina Lab with our clients. And if you want to learn more about this, our solution-focused approach, a complimentary coaching session by visiting staminalab.io. And leave any questions or comments below, and the likes. We love those. And I will be happy to answer those questions. Thank you, Dr. Teplow.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Until next time, remember, you are your own lab, you are your own experiment, and you are your own best coach. Be well.